Pray. Dear Lord, as legislators, we make laws for all Albertans. We ask for your guidance in making certain those laws are fair and just. Amen.
Sure want Thank you.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to present the following petition that has been received for a private bill. The petition of Frederick L. Benini, Mervyn L. Henkelman, Peter D. McKean, David Starko, and Ronald C. Swist for the Federal Canadian Trust and Bond Corporation.
Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Honourable Member Dunvegan.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Legislative Assembly 20 students from the grade 6 class at the Spirit River School in the constituency of Dunvegan. These students are accompanied by one teacher, Mr. Leon Tychuk, 3 parents, Mrs. Lynn Phillips, Mrs. Heather Kirschbaumer, and Mrs. Donna Dennis. They are seated in the public gallery, and I ask them to stand and receive the customary welcome of the Assembly.
Honourable Member Edmonton Belmont.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be able to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly a guest from Prince George, British Columbia. Mr. Speaker, Beth Kilbreth is visiting with her family, who just happen to reside in that wonderful constituency of Edmonton Belmont. She is accompanied today by her sister-in-law, Marie Lacombe, who just by chance happens to be the wife of our man that carries the mace, the Sergeant-at-Arms Oscar Lacombe. Mr. Speaker, Beth Kilbreth and Marie Lacombe are in the public gallery. I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of the members of the Assembly.
Honourable Minister Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and to members of the Legislative Assembly 2 groups of students from our constituency of Sherwood Park. And let me begin with a group of 39 students which are in grade 6 from the Father Kenneth Cairns School. They are here with 2 teachers, Mr. Bruce Plant and Mrs. Maria Goliaths. They're in the members gallery, and I would ask if they would rise and receive the warm welcome of the Legislative Assembly. In addition to that, we have 60 students in grades 5, 6, plus 7, and 8 from the Madonna School. They are with 5 teachers, Mrs. McCarger, Mrs. Hess, Mrs. Chariot, Mr. Player, and Mr. Beresnicki. They are in the members and public gallery. I would ask them also to rise and receive the warm welcome of the Legislative Assembly, and maybe I could just indicate to Mr. Speaker, I look forward to getting together with both groups after question period.
Minister of Transportation Utilities.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'd like to beg leave to table the annual report of the Department of Transportation for 1985-86.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier today. Mr. Speaker, the communique on agriculture from the Western Premier says, and I quote, "Current circumstances and the complexities of the GOT process require an increased level of domestic farm support until progress in the international policy arena is reflected in price and income improvements." Mr. Speaker, this is a fine sentiment, and I agree with it. But the problem, as I see it, Mr. Speaker, is the provincial government itself has not responded in any way to the further decline in grain prices this year. My question to the Premier, will the Premier indicate his willingness today to reconsider his earlier refusal to consider a provincial component on the increased domestic farm income support advocated by the Western Premiers? Mr. Speaker, if the Premier would do that today, it would put more pressure on the federal government.
Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't do that, and certainly not before being able to meet with the federal government and to get their reaction and hopefully have them, since this is something throughout Canada, grain farmers throughout Canada involved, have them make the kind of payment that they made last year, only more.
Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that I agree with the Premier. It's throughout the country, but a significant number of those farmers are right here in this province right now. Mr. Speaker, the call for federal deficiency payments is well and good, but my question today, specifically what we have control over, if the federal government doesn't do anything, is the Premier now closing the door absolutely on provincial participation at this particular time?
Mr. Speaker, I just think it's premature, and I think it's well recognized by Alberta's farmers that this government helps Alberta's farmers more than any farm organizations in Canada.
Mr. Speaker, history lessons are well and dandy, but the point is, since just in this year there's been an 18% drop in grain prices that will come due August the 1st, there's been a 5.9% increase in transportation. My question simply to the Premier, in view of this, rather than sit and wait for the federal government, what announcements and what initiatives is this government going to take, or we won't have many of our farmers around in a couple of months?
Should be clear, too, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, I think knows this, that it's the grain farmers that require the assistance, and it's the grain farmers that we are asking Ottawa to help with the deficiency payments. Those who farm in the areas of cattle, hogs, and poultry are doing very well and are helping. One of the things that I would like to see more and more the grain farmers in this province do is diversify and ensure that they are broadening their economic base in the farm operation.
Mr. Speaker, I can't stress the urgency of the matter. Time is running out. We're not talking about a hypothetical situation, Mr. Speaker. Many of our grain farmers are in dire straits and won't be around next year. And my question is, even if the government didn't do anything, it would probably be better. And I remind the Premier that on Monday the provincial government will add 23 cents per gallon to the cost of farm fuels. Would the government at least, in view of this, consider a moratorium on fuel cost increases until the grain farmers receive at least some price and income improvements from the federal government?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, as discussed yesterday in the House, the grain farmers are going to receive a large payment before the end of June from the federal government. And we have asked the federal government to consider another one before the end of the year, 1987. Also, my review with the grain farmers is that they have put in their crops and have, in fact, built up significant storehouses of the gasoline that they require, even in many cases for the end of the year, the actual taking off of the crops. And they tell me that because they've had this time up until June the 1st, they've been able to adequately get their crops in.
Supplementary Liberal Leader.
Supplementary to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, if I may, in view of the fact that as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has already pointed out, the very serious nature of the debt situation of many farmers, to the extent indeed that the federal government announced yesterday that they're appointing a second board to look after people going broke. Will not the Premier reactivate the legislation that's been in with the force here for many years of bringing forward the debt adjustment board to see that no foreclosure can take place of any farmer without going before the Judge Adjustment Board.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party would have to make the point that that would help the farmers in Alberta. And he's been unable to do that, nor has it proven true anywhere that's been tried.
Supplementary, Cloverbar.
Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister of Agriculture. In the Minister's view and discussions within his department and other ministers of agriculture, and looking at the world situation of surplus of grains especially, can the Minister indicate when we expect a turnaround in agriculture in Alberta and in Western Canada?
Mr. Speaker, it says the Premier has indicated, I think it's important that we recognize that our main difficulties are in the grain sector. The livestock sector, the poultry sector, and the dairy sector all do have that stability presently. And as it relates to the grain sector, Mr. Speaker, I'm accused so often of being too optimistic, but I am hopeful that there will be a turnaround, and that is why we have been so aggressive in the stance that this provincial government has taken to as it relates to trade talks, to remove these subsidy levels as best we can and to have an influence on that so that those subsidy levels of the European Economic Community and the U.S. are removed so that our farmers can compete on a playing field that is level. And we're going to continue to actively pursue that.
Member Stedler, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Agriculture, I wonder if he could tell us, there's been some recent news in the grain markets that futures prices are trending upwards, and there has been some positive news from the Federal Minister of Trade. I wonder if the Minister could advise the Assembly whether he sees an agreement between world grain exporters that could firm up grain prices.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, this underscores what I indicated to the honourable member from Clover Bar. That is our feeling. It's interesting to note, too, if I can point out two items, Mr. Speaker, that when we look at the statistics as it relates to farm decline, as to the number of farming population, the number of farmers we do have in the various provinces, the province of Alberta, the farm decline was the smallest of any province in Canada, mainly due to the large support that is received from our farming population from this provincial government. And we're going to continue with that strong commitment, as the Premier has indicated in many forums. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, if I could just on the gasoline, I just had my tanks filled yesterday, and our supplier had indicated to us that he didn't see that he was going to be very busy over the next couple of months because most farmers...
With respect, Honourable Minister, it's a long way from gasoline. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Edmonton Highlands. No, two. I'll designate two.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that the outcome of yesterday's meeting between the Women's Advisory Council and the hospital's ministers resulted in a possible commitment that Cabinet may reconsider removing sterilization from the coverage under Medicare. I wonder if the minister responsible for the Women's Council will undertake to assert to the hospital's minister on behalf of Alberta women and their families that the best thing to do is to permit no cuts at all in this preventative reproductive counseling and sterilization process.
Mr. Speaker, I haven't had an opportunity to discuss with the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care his meeting yesterday as yet. I look forward to doing that and to investigating possibilities which he explored with the Council yesterday in their meeting. In terms of the overall cuts, I believe that what we have to do always is to ensure that those who require medical assistance, women in this particular case, as the Honourable Member mentions, are receiving it and will receive such counselling properly. Ministers in previous question periods have outlined ways in which that is anticipated to take place, despite the certain reductions which the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care has outlined.
Supplementary question. It wasn't just reduction, it was elimination, striking out. Mr. Speaker, the hospitals minister didn't bother to consult with the affected quarters prior to announcing his sneak attack on women in Alberta. has the minister responsible for the Women's Council taken the time to do that on behalf of the women who are affected? If he hasn't, will he now commit himself to doing that prior to allowing these cuts to be implemented?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure that one would agree with the analysis that there was not an investigation of the potential effects prior to the minister's announcement. All of the alternatives were considered and the various options that are available looked at in that respect. I certainly would undertake to continue to discuss with women's organizations and to monitor the situation as it relates to women's health services in the province with my honourable colleagues who are responsible in that particular area.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. That's like an admission that he hasn't already. Mr. Speaker, given the ho-hum, who cares attitude displayed by the hospitals minister on this very important issue, will the minister responsible for the Women's Council commit himself now to undertaking public hearings across the province on this very important preventive measure being cut from Medicare? Will he commit himself to that, please?
Mr. Speaker, in my own opinion, public hearings wouldn't be sufficient in terms of evaluating the ongoing needs of women in the healthcare area. We need to be sure through a more grassroots level that, in fact, the services which women require are being provided, and that is undertaken through the Department of Community and Occupational Health and through the Department of Hospitals and Medical Care. And I certainly would undertake to work with those honourable colleagues in ensuring that the proper services remain and that women who require the services indeed receive them.
Well, final supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, perhaps this time to the grassroots minister, the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. The minister has been saying in this assembly for the last couple of weeks that the local health units can implement reproductive counseling programs if they want. Will the minister agree now to providing a special additional fund which those health units which currently don't have such a program can call upon in order to develop and strengthen such a program?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member were listening the other day, on Wednesday, I mentioned to the honourable member for Edmonton Gold Bar that this report prepared by a number of individuals in the community health system, In Trouble, A Way Out, had prepared a very good report, that we were taking the information from that report and asking those 27 medical officers of health to work with our community health people to come back to us by July 1 with some appropriate recommendations on actions that should be taken.
Supplementary, Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My supplementary is to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health, and the report to which he relates, of course, is restricted or specifically about teenage pregnancy. Will the minister now undertake to consult not only with those public health units, but with the private agencies who provide counseling through FCSS and other sources as to their ideas about how the appalling gap that has been created by the de-insurance can be filled?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member raises a very good point, and it's one that we discussed with the Women's Advisory Council yesterday, that health units can take on this responsibility, but so too must local municipalities. And of the 110 municipalities who contract with this government to deliver family and community support services, 2 of those municipalities do so. So we would encourage the other 108 municipalities to carefully consider their priorities, recognize that this is a problem, and that they should set their priorities to reflect the nature of this problem.
Order, please. Leader of the Liberal Party.
Main question, Mr. Speaker, and thank you. My question today is to the Premier with respect to the Meech Lake area. A great many people, including ex-Premier Lougheed and David Kilgore, MP, have pointed out that the Meech Lake Accord is going to make Senate reform more difficult to achieve. In actual fact, the Premier has yesterday misled the House when he said that we have Senate reform guaranteed in new Constitution. We don't. We merely have an agreement to discuss. Now, will the Premier, question then, Mr. Speaker, will the Premier admit that we don't have Senate reform in the Meech Lake Accord, just a guarantee of discussion, that he may have made this mistake in the House to hide the fact that Alberta got very little out of the Meech Lake Accord?
Mr. Speaker, it's remarkable how the Liberal Party, having totally broken apart over the issue of the Meech Lake Accord, now is trying in some way to undermine the progress that was made in that accord. It's really remarkable that rather than thinking about the things that we've accomplished for Canada, Western Canada and Alberta in particular, that they should now try and somehow break it down because their own party is such a shambles with regard to that accord.
When you have nothing to say, you come out and attack. I can tell, Mr. Speaker, assure the Premier that this party speaks with one voice. One voice.
Which one? The voice of the ventriloquist.
Like you, Mr. Premier, I have no control over my federal counterparts. In fact, I mentioned ex-Premier Lougheed. Ex-Premier Lougheed would agree. Does he agree with ex-Premier Lougheed, his predecessor, that Senate reform is now more difficult to achieve due to the need for unanimity?
Mr. Speaker, ex-Premier Lougheed congratulated me very strongly on the progress made on behalf of Alberta at the Meech Lake Accord. Frankly, his view is like mine, that Senate reform is complicated. It always will be. That's why we haven't been able to do it in 120 years. But never before has it ever been insisted that it be placed in the Constitution, which is arguably the most important act in this country. And therefore, by annual meetings, perhaps more, and I believe there would be more than one a year, we will have debate, presentations by various provinces, presentations by the federal government, papers developed, and I believe that we are going to end up coming around to seeing that the position that this legislature has taken and that Alberta supports and British Columbia supports, the Triple E Senate, is the one that we'll select.
Speaker, the Premier believes, many people believe in the second coming too, but that takes some time. Quebec is apparently now attempting, because of the formation of an all-party committee, what the Premier has refused to do in this House, to change their accord. Now, would the Premier reopen negotiations on references to the Senate reform to get just a little bit more than what he has had up to now?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, Quebec has not got an all-party committee to try and change the accord. That's complete false statement, and the honourable member shouldn't try and mislead the House. I think it's probably because he doesn't know the facts, but I don't think he's doing it intentionally.
Mr. Speaker, I notice Oco representative got up in a hurry, and I was just going to give him some minutes there again. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, who is using my own words back, if anybody misleads the House, it has to be him. But the Western Premiers were obviously supportive of rejecting pressures to alter the intent of the accord. But Quebec is doing it. Quebec is altering the intent of the accord. Why are you then opposed to altering the intent of the accord if you don't think, is there nothing worth altering? Do you think you have a perfect accord?
Mr. Speaker, Quebec is not altering the intent of the accord. No participants to the accord are altering it. And I think because the honourable member has taken the time today to talk about altering and that I'm misleading the House or something with regards to the accord, I just think, Mr. Speaker, that I have the opportunity now to just refresh members' minds about what the accord says. What has happened, Mr. Speaker, is that over a period of years, under federal governments under the Liberal Party, there has been more and more centralization in Ottawa. They have, in many cases, tried to run around the Constitution which gives certain responsibilities and powers to provinces in the same way it gives them to the federal government. And in doing that, they have offended many parts of the country. For instance, they could not even get Quebec into the Constitution. Now, in this accord, we have achieved bringing Quebec into the Constitution, something the Liberal Party was incapable of doing because of their idea that they had auto... Now, you see, Mr. Speaker, I sat and listened to him. Surely he should have the courtesy, to listen himself and not turn our House here into the kind of mess that their party is doing in Ottawa. I would hope that...
Order, please. Order, please. This is really not to anybody's benefit. Will honourable members let the honourable Premier answer the question? Order, please. Order, please. A point of order will be raised after question period. Members who put questions to ministers must anticipate the answers the ministers are going to give. Honourable Premier.
I would hope people who watch this on television in the galleries would recognize the way they're trying to break down the decorum of this legislature. Mr. Speaker, what they were unable to do is bring Quebec into the Constitution. Under that kind of centralized government the Liberals believed in Ottawa, where they felt that the provinces should be pushed down, treated like second-class cousins, and unable to accept the fact that that is not the way a strong Canada would be built. Therefore, we now have been able to reverse some of that damage that has been done. Quebec is now coming fully into the Constitution. We have first ministers' meetings guaranteed in the constitutions on the economy. It's never been done before in history, and that enforces the equality of provinces around the table in these meetings and on the economy. We have Senate reform in the constitutions. It can't come out. It will be in there. We will discuss.
With respect, honourable Premier, the answer to the question is somewhat beyond I think the intent of the question. Supplementary, honourable Premier.
I just wanted to say, Mr. Speaker, when a member does say that I've misled the House about something in the accord, I think that, with respect, there is a chance to just refresh people's memory about what the accord does. And I just wanted to point out that we have established the matter of equal provinces. We have established provincial input into the Supreme Court, provincial input into Senate appointments, and we have...
Thank you. Thank you, honourable Premier. Supplementary, Calgary-Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the benefit of the Lochiel representative and the other members present today in the House.
Former Lochiel, former.
I would, Mr. Speaker, like to direct another supplementary to the Premier. Given that in my constituency and in other quarters of the province, there appears to be some concern that the Meech Lake Accord is being put into place with an element of rush and hurriedness, and that there's an inadequate opportunity for our constituents to participate in that process. I wonder if the Premier, Mr. Speaker, could clarify what additional opportunities the members of this House, on behalf of their constituents, will have to participate in the implementation of the Meech Lake Accord.
Be pleased to, Mr. Speaker, assuming that an accord is signed on Tuesday, that accord must then come before the Alberta legislature. It must also go before every legislature in Canada and must be passed. It must be unanimous. Every legislature must support it. Therefore, it will be debated. It must also go through the House of Commons, represented by all Canadians, and that must also be passed. Full debate, all parties, as long as it takes. All of them must approve it. Then the Alberta Act must be amended. And again, there is debate opportunities. And the same will happen in every province and in the House of Commons. So there is no rush, there is no secrecy, there is a accord that we believe is a significant step forward for Canada, and that it will be treated with all the respect, all the time that is necessary.
Supplementary, Leader of the Opposition.
My question to the Premier. If there is a final agreement on the Meech Lake Accord on June the 2nd, will the Premier be bringing this resolution back to this Assembly during this session, or will we have a fall session, and is there the possibility of having public hearings on the final accord?
Mr. Speaker, the commitment I make, as I've just made, is that it will be brought to this Assembly and debated here, and it will be passed here.
Honourable members, order please. Order please. Before we proceed, the Chair does not wish to take the time of question period. The member for Westlock Sturgeon used the term misled with regard to a question of the Premier. The honourable member should be advised that is unparliamentary. He perhaps might take appropriate action. Honourable Premier perhaps made a comment in the same vein. The Chair would ask both gentlemen to consider those remarks prior to the end of question period and take appropriate action. Honourable member Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, if I said anything that would lead anyone to think that he intentionally misled the House, I would withdraw that comment.
Mr. Speaker, as a matter of fact, I mentioned the word mistake, but I had intentionally took out the word intentional when I looked at my draft.
Representative Party.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to address my question to the Honourable Minister of the Environment. And this is as my concern about protection of the environment. Last year or recently, there have been about over 500,000 pesticide containers collected in Alberta. And apparently the people that are collecting these containers don't know what to do with them. Can the Minister indicate what policy is in place, if there is a policy, as to what to do with these pesticide containers?
Mr. Speaker, in the last several years, there have been approximately 650,000 pesticide containers collected throughout the province of Alberta. And until last summer, essentially these pesticide containers, and there's two types of them, the metal ones have been basically going to recyclers here in the province of Alberta, and we've had a continuing problem of what to do with the plastic ones. Until last summer, essentially those plastic ones were shredded and then deposited in landfills. During the summer, I basically indicated that I wanted that situation stopped and declared that there should be no more shredding of plastics, and I've asked that all the plastic containers be stockpiled at some 100 collection systems throughout the province of Alberta until we determine or find a solution as to how we might ultimately dispose of those pesticide containers.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, what direction has been given to municipalities as to the acceptance of the material into their landfill site areas?
Frankly, I'm asking all municipalities throughout the province to not landfill them. We have at many waste disposal sites throughout the province of Alberta a part of that particular site cordoned off, and basically we're asking the municipal authorities to simply store them there. There are a number of initiatives we're looking at, and I'm rather hopeful, in fact, that not too long period of time that we will find some useful use for these containers. I might add that if there's any entrepreneur in the province of Alberta who wants to come to me with a proposal as to how that individual might make use of the plastics contained in those pesticide containers, I'd be very happy to give them all the feedstock necessary so that they could get on with the recycling project.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister, what direction has been given by the department to the people who are handling the containers as to what they do with the material? And quite often there's a cup or two of it that's left in. What did you do with the actual material that's in the containers?
For the most part, Mr. Speaker, individuals who use the pesticide containers, and for the most part they're farmers, in recent years associated with most pesticide containers has been a piece of paper that's been provided to them by the Crop Protection Institute of Canada, which shows how they might safely rinse out the material. And for the most part, there's very, very little material left in the container itself.
Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary. Has the Minister given any direction that these containers now be stored at the site, at the hazardous waste disposal site in Swan Hills?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's no indication whatsoever that we're talking about anything hazardous. We're basically talking about a plastic container that had contained a particular chemical. In other countries of the world, there are recycling projects where basically these pesticide containers are taken, melted down, and turned into a new product. As an example, in the country of Holland, these plastics are basically recycled and are turned into fence posts. That is one of the type of recycling alternative that we're basically looking at. In addition to that, the recent report that we made public that was written by the Environment Council of Alberta had several very useful recommendations with respect to the ultimate disposal of plastic pesticide containers, and I expect in having before me in the next several months several proposals from private entrepreneurs as to how we might utilize the resource that's contained in those containers and turn them into another product.
Supplementary, Glengarry.
Thank you. The minister said that they aren't hazardous, and yet said that he's told the landfill operators not to allow them to be just dumped and buried. I'm wondering, in view of that contradiction, I'm wondering what the minister is doing actively to ensure that the small municipal landfills are forced to comply with his request and to make sure that they aren't being burned in landfills or left laying on the ground where rainwater can wash the residue chemical into the ground.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's absolutely no contradiction. I don't know where the member has been. We're talking about encouraging a recycling industry. The reason that I basically indicated to municipal authorities throughout the province not to landfill them, and the definition of the word landfill, and I understand the person is a former teacher, that landfill means to dig a hole in the ground and to put something in the ground and then to cover it and forget about it. What I have said is that you must store those pesticide containers, and hopefully we will find an alternative use to those particular containers, in other words, to encourage a recycling industry. Certainly, Mr. Speaker, that's not a contradiction. That's a very altruistic motive and objective that the people of Alberta truly believe in, the need to clean up and improve our environment.
Supplementary, Vermilion making.
Yes. Could the minister indicate if the reason an entrepreneur isn't stepping forward with a way of getting rid of them is because of monies involved? And if so, is the minister looking at ways to enhance that position?
One of the difficulties with the recycling industry with respect to plastics, particularly in the province of Alberta, is, of course, the fact that Alberta is one of the leading plastic manufacturing provinces or jurisdictions in the world. So economics certainly does come into play with respect to this. I think that the possibility of finding an alternative use for these containers will be before us before too long. And I've also indicated very publicly that should a proposal, a research proposal, or an active entrepreneurial proposal come towards me that might require the province of Alberta to direct a few dollars towards a recycling project, that the government would be very happy to entertain such a proposal.
We have 6 members wanting to ask questions. Let's move along. Honourable Member Redger North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Social Services. From the time that the Minister has reduced welfare benefits to single employables, I've heard from different sets of parents in my constituency reporting that their young people who had previously moved out of home and had been living with other young people on welfare had now returned home to live with their parents. These parents were concerned that the young people were not working. This is my first sentence, Mr. Speaker. Second sentence is, these parents were concerned and were asking about the various job and career opportunities available to their young people. Can the minister inform the House if her department is aware of similar cases around the province of single employables returning home and receiving assistance from their families?
Mr. Speaker, I think it's noteworthy that the family is still recognized as the basic unit in our society, and that young people, in fact, are welcomed home if, in fact, they are in need. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it's noteworthy that just a few years ago in another ministry, I recall disseminating some information to students, and it was done by way of a booklet called Moving Out. I've had many parents say to me that I hope that one now will be produced called Moving Back In.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary, along this whole question of homelessness, can the minister confirm whether the single men's hostel here in Edmonton is only operating presently at about 20% occupancy rate?
Mr. Speaker, obviously we are always concerned that there will be emergency accommodation available to people, and it is true that right now the hostel is operating at about that figure. I think my last count was that there were some 48 people out of a capacity of 249. But I think it's important to note that this figure does vary. We've had as high over the last few months of 70 people being there.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Aside from government job and training programs, can the minister tell us, in light of the fact that on any given day the Edmonton Journal want ads offer an average of a minimum of some 250 job opportunities to unskilled workers, do her caseworkers bring these job opportunities to the attention of single employables, along with some corresponding follow-up and monitoring?
Mr. Speaker, yes, information is provided as best possible. Obviously, the people who are on social allowance are not in on a regular basis. And I would believe with the appropriate amount of initiative that the canvass would be made by those individuals of the jobs that are available. In fact, in order to continue to qualify for social allowance, a canvass must be made, and it must be shown by way of a form that, in fact, the individual is looking for jobs.
Supplementary to the Minister, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister indicate to this Assembly whether or not each and every district office has posted accommodation that is available for $180 per month?
Mr. Speaker, what we have done is asked that the offices post notices that are from two perspectives. One is those seeking accommodation, and the other part of it is those who have accommodation to offer.
Honourable Member Supplementary Goldbar.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. Can the Minister inform the House if caseworkers for income security working with unemployed employables are able to see the client in less than the 6 months' time that was in evidence around the beginning of the year? They had to wait 6 months for an appointment on employment with a caseworker.
Mr. Speaker, that particular time frame has been shortened significantly. We've developed a new set of guidelines, and it is my hope with appropriate monitoring that those guidelines will be met.
Honourable Member Regulville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Honourable Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications about rural telephone systems. I read with interest in the Minister's magazine about a device marketed by Trison Instruments of Sherwood Park called the PLC-1, the Party Line Converter. Now, this device is currently being tested in the Vegreville district, and it removes some of the hassles of party line use by giving people the opportunity to hear only their own rings and have conversations in privacy and use answering machines. And I'm wondering if the endorsement of this device given by the Conservative Rural Caucus last week means that it will be substituted for the individual line program promised in last year's election.
Mr. Speaker, I can answer categorically that the commitment of 1985 to provide, in 1986 to provide individual line service stands.
Supplementary to the Minister. I'm glad to hear that, but we need to see some indication of commitment. I understand that there were some 75 exchanges due to be turned on as of March 19th. That was reduced to 14 in April, and now 26. When will the Minister present us with a schedule that clearly outlines when this is all going to take place?
Mr. Speaker, the commitment given was to provide individual line service in a period of approximately 5 years, and that commitment stands. With respect to the work that was done in 1986, it is my understanding that roughly 15,000 households now on party line would be able to be put on individual line as soon as the Public Utilities Board, which is currently considering the matter, and I think began hearings several weeks ago, and I believe the hearings reconvene next week, as soon as that decision is rendered, and following that, when households know what the costs will be according to the Public Utilities Board, the houses are jacked because they will require for individual line service the same kind of telephones and telephone connecting apparatus as exists in the individual lines in the city situation. That does require a change, as I understand it, of telephone, and it requires a rejacking of the houses. That's all that is withholding the commencement of almost 20%, not quite 20%, of the party line subscribers at the moment.
Well, is it the case, Mr. Speaker, that this program is proving to be more expensive than originally anticipated, and that it's causing some difficulty, the requirement that AGT be forced to pay the 25% of this campaign commitment?
No, it is not, Mr. Speaker. It's a case of some interveners, as I understand it, who are making their case for whatever reason that, as I understand, is resulting in a longer hearing than was anticipated. But, Mr. Speaker, my analysis, renewed or reviewed analysis of the cost of the program does not indicate a change in the cost of the program, and in fact the burden to Alberta government telephones is that required for modernization, and modernization has been going on in any event, and this would not, in my view, cause Alberta government telephones any extra cost.
Well, Mr. Speaker, even though we're almost a year and a half into that 5-year period, and assuming that the minister is correct that things are on schedule, will the government be supplying this PLC1 to people in the interim, especially the people whose lines aren't scheduled to be converted until the end of the 5-year program?
Mr. Speaker, the testing, the field testing of the party line converter is still in the stage of field test, and the honourable member for Vegreville is correct that some of that testing is being done in Vegreville area, but some is also being done in other parts of the province, and the tests are not complete. They've been ongoing, I think, a maximum of 3 weeks, but possibly 4.
Supplementary, Liberal Leader.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the minister. In view of the fact that his original program calls for a $400 payment for installation, which seems very unfair to a rural subscriber, is his department giving any attention to cutting that fee to something more in line with the rest of the province, the rest of the phone users in the province, something in the vicinity of $50?
Mr. Speaker, the election commitment stands, and as far as I am aware at the moment, the subscription cost would be possible to be paid in a lump sum, or it could be as low as $4 a month over a period of years. And I do not believe that that would be an unfair charge, considering the kind of service and the fact that service in rural areas is considerably more expensive than it is in urban areas, simply because of the distance by which or for which individual lines must be extended.
Honourable Member Calgary, Honourable Member Cardston.
Question to the Minister. Can the Minister give us some idea as to what kind of resistance he's received from rural telephone subscribers about the $400 charge? Has he had an indication that they feel that it's excessive?
Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, all of the requests that I'm receiving are pleased to get the lines in as quickly as possible, and offers of paying more than, in fact, the proposed charges by those people who urgently believe they need them. And I think that will be true for most rural Albertans, that they will consider the benefit to be well worth the small price that's involved.
Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question this morning, I'd like to begin with a question to the Minister of Labour. Yesterday, Canadian Airlines International announced that despite previously stated intentions, it was going to be laying off up to 1,900 of its employees, almost 15% of its combined staff, many of whom work in Edmonton, approximately 400, 1,100 in Calgary. To the Minister of Labour, is it the government's position that these major cutbacks in the Alberta workforce of this airline is acceptable, and that should, or is it their position that should these cutbacks be made, that the government will use whatever leverage it has to have those cuts reversed?
Mr. Speaker, it is indeed unfortunate if there are going to be cutbacks in employment in Alberta as a result of the development of the Canadian airline industry. One has to weigh that against the benefits to the productivity and the ability of Canadian airlines to compete in a highly competitive environment, not only in North America but around the world. And if we can have two Canadian airlines rather than one that are in that competitive position, then there will be some detriment to employment if that is the decision of the private sector.
The time has expired for question period. May we conclude the normal series of questions? Any opposed? Calgary Mountain View supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister for Career Development, seeing that as far as the takeover of Woodward's by Safeway, as the Minister is not going to do anything on saving those jobs, is he prepared in this instance to do something to protect Albertans who are losing their jobs with Canadian Airlines International?
Mr. Speaker, I too read the report in the newspaper this morning, and I am in the process of making some inquiries, and I would prefer to have more substantive evidence than a headline in the paper.
Well, supplementary, Mr. Speaker, I assume to the Minister of Career Development that the people laid off by this airlines will not be eligible for the Work for Welfare program. Is the Minister concerned that Alberta is losing good, skilled jobs at a rate faster than those that he can manufacture with his low-pay jobs Work for Welfare scheme?
Mr. Speaker, I have just, as I do on a regular basis, reviewed the labour force statistics in this province, and it's quite indicative of a trend that I am pleased to notice, and that is that in unadjusted terms, the number of people unemployed in this province in the last 3 months has dropped from, well, I would say dropped some 6,000 people. As a matter of fact, in terms of unadjusted terms for the unemployment rate, Mr. Speaker, it's dropped from 11.6 in February to 11% in April. There are indicators, Mr. Speaker, that the economy is strengthening in Alberta. It is very important for us to match a skilled labour force when we see indications that there's going to be a demand for a skilled labour force. That's our intention. Now, in terms of the situation with PWA and the Canadian International Airlines, Mr. Speaker, if there are adjustments being made by that company in their business decisions, and they reflect people losing their job, it's unfortunate. But we must understand, Mr. Speaker, when there are business arrangements made between two companies that involve takeovers, usually it means that there is the health of one company is in a state such that another company comes in and takes it over. If we step in and stop mergers and takeovers, Mr. Speaker, we could be creating a situation that creates much greater unemployment as a result of intervening in the financial arrangement, Mr. Speaker. And I don't want to become involved in something along those lines.
Mr. Speaker, the statistics that concern these workers are whether they're going to be working or not. As a major shareholder in Pacific Western, presumably the government must have assured itself prior to this merger there'd be some economic benefit to the Premier. Would he tell us what he considers the economic benefits to Alberta to be, given the large loss of good jobs and skilled workers to this province?
Mr. Speaker, the government is not a shareholder of Pacific Western Airlines. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I have a great deal more confidence in the people in Alberta able to obtain work and get jobs. If they have skills, then they will get jobs. If we can help them with those skills, we will. The Honourable Minister pointed out that quite often in an occasion like this, you have a company like Canadian Pacific Airlines, who were taken over, who were very weak and might well have just closed down completely and thrown many people out of work. We now have an occasion where a company that believes in Alberta, Canadian Airlines International, believes in Alberta, has their head office here, and is going to compete all over the world. What we believe will happen is, because of the strength of that company in its new merged form, that it will grow, compete in a healthy way, and end up having far more people and play a greater role in the strength of this province in the future.
Supplementary, Leader of the Liberal Party.
Supplementary back to the Minister of Manpower in the creation of jobs or the possible loss of jobs. As the Minister met with and/or Amico and/or Dome to see what the loss of jobs will be in Alberta.
Order, please. Order, please. This is a long way from an airline, and quite frankly, the chair is uneasy about the whole question of an airline. Order, please. In that whether or not that's even within provincial jurisdiction. Now, that question is clearly not related to the honourable question of Member Calgary Mountain View. Cypress Redcliffe.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if either the acting provincial treasurer or the premier can inform the Assembly on how many shares or what percentage of shares the Alberta government holds in either Pacific Western or Canadian Airline International.
Mr. Speaker, subject to the provincial treasurer checking if there's something in the Heritage Trust Fund, a small few thousand shares. The province has sold completely its ownership interest in PWA.
There's been
questions on loss of jobs on the Safeway takeover, not the airline.
Order, please. Question period. Question period is concluded. The honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon had raised a point of order earlier in the question period. Do you wish to pursue that?
Earlier one, not the loss of jobs. Obviously, they're trying to hide behind Amico's skirts here. This was with respect to under Beauchesne 358.2, when the Premier went into a rather long-winded reply. It says answers to questions should be as brief as possible and should deal with the matter raised and should not provoke debate. While I'll admit that the Premier did not provoke debate, he only provoked laughter. Nevertheless, I think it falls under this question. He was trying to provoke a debate.
To the point of order.
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, it's really remarkable. The honourable member says, why aren't we talking more about the Meech Lake Accord? And then